Canadians will soon be allowed to openly enjoy a different kind of foliage this fall. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced today recreational marijuana will be legal in this country on October 17th.
We heard from provinces and territories who told us they needed more time to transition to this new framework. So our government will continue to work in full partnership with them to ensure the smooth and orderly implementation of this new law across Canada.
That may be true, but several issues remain unresolved. How pot smokers will be dealt with at the U.S. border, for instance, or whether people who have criminal records for simple possession will be pardoned. There's also the matter of growing pot at home, something Quebec, Manitoba, and Nunavut oppose. Like those provinces, BC has determined its own rules around sales and distribution, so far settling on a wholesale model, with the province selling pot to licensed private retailers or through government-operated stores. But not every municipality is ready to set up shop. For more, we turn to our municipal affairs reporter, Justin McElroy. Justin, recreational marijuana has long been associated with BC, but perhaps not surprisingly, not everyone here is on board with legalization.
That's right, Dan. So October 17th, you'll be able to consume marijuana anywhere in the province, but where you'll be able to purchase it is a different story. A number of municipalities in the past few months have passed bylaws banning any marijuana outlets from opening in their city boundaries, and they include some pretty populous places in the Lower Mainland. We'll take a look at the board right here. 5 of them in particular. Delta is one of them, Maple Ridge. We also have the city of Richmond, the city of North Vancouver, and then finally White Rock. All of them in one form or the other have put in these bylaws saying that outlets won't be allowed to open either permanently or until they come up with new regulations once it is actually legalized come October.
So how do these cities justify their opposition?
Well, it changes from place to place. And some of them, they simply say they don't want these sort of outlets here. They think that it'll bring crime to the neighborhoods. In other places, they just want to wait and see what other municipalities are going to do. But the provincial government has given these municipalities a veto in terms of allowing licenses to go through. So you could see in some places like Vancouver or Surrey, for example, on October 17th, stores far and wide that are already in place and have gotten all the appropriate permits, but in other ones, it could be months and months until something happens.
Overall, on legalization, what does the province think?
Well, the province has been pretty happy with the framework that they've been putting in place and have said they're fine if some cities choose not to adopt any regulations. But one thing to keep in mind, it's October 17th that cannabis is legalized. It's October 20th when we have the municipal elections. So it's safe to imagine that a lot of city councillors and mayors might prefer that someone else deal with the nuts and bolts in terms of how legalization takes place in their city.
Timing is everything. Justin McElroy, thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Meanwhile, Vancouver police are reminding drivers that the rules around pot and driving still apply.
Road safety is a shared responsibility. If you've had a drink, if you've been smoking marijuana or using any sort of drug that causes your ability to operate a motor vehicle, if that brings that into question or you're impaired from that, don't get behind the wheel.
Driving high is just one concern. Later on in the show, we're going to speak with an SFU criminologist about some of the other challenges surrounding legalization.
It is our hope that as of October 17th, there will be a smooth operation of retail cannabis outlets operated by the provinces.
Mark your calendars. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau confirming today that recreational pot will be legal in Canada this fall. But while the 17-week wait is designed to ease people into legalization, here in Vancouver, police say their approach to enforcement is unlikely to change much.
At this point, we've been investigating drug impairment investigations on the road for years. We've got officers that are trained in field sobriety testing. We have drug recognition experts. We are going to continue to use those tools that we have at this point, and we are going to take advantage of whatever tools that we're provided with that are court approved and that are provided by the Police Services of British Columbia.
Neil Boyd is a professor of criminology at Simon Fraser University. Neil, what are some of the tools you think officers here could be using to detect or prevent people from, for example, driving high once recreational marijuana is completely legalized?
Well, I don't think there's any magic wand at the moment, nothing analogous to the breathalyzer for alcohol. They will use some of the techniques that they've developed over time with respect to identifying drug-impaired drivers, identifying impairment. I think the real cautionary tale is with respect to the mix of alcohol and cannabis. It's pretty clear that there's a synergistic impact, and that when people are consuming relatively low levels of alcohol along with relatively high potency cannabis, that produces a significant impairment while driving.
South of the border, Colorado's black market for marijuana hasn't disappeared since the state legalized pot. What are some of the things authorities here can do to try and see that our black market either diminishes or somehow goes away?
Well, I think it would be naive to presume that the black market is going to disappear immediately. It's going to take some time. It's diminished in Colorado. I would expect it to diminish here as well. I think the keys are, price it in a competitive way with the black market. But the big advantage is you can give guarantees of potency with respect to CBD and THC. You can give guarantees of product safety with respect to pesticides and the like. And people will be willing to pay a little more for the greater choice, the greater protection, and the greater knowledge of what it is that they are consuming.
And finally, illegal dispensaries have been an issue in our region, and particularly in Vancouver, for years. What do you think is going to happen to them going forward?
Well, I think some of the dispensaries are going to join this new marketplace. I think that, it's clear that many dispensaries did cooperate with Vancouver. Many have secured business licenses. The difference will be that they will now have to sell the products of licensed producers rather than products from the gray or illicit market. And so there'll be a transitional period. I would expect that not long after October 17th, we'll see many of the dispensaries that are in operation today complying with these new regulations. There will be some, however, that drop out. I don't think we're going to see 95 dispensaries post October 17th, but we shall see.
Neil Boyd, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, StatsCan tells us about 1 in 7 Canadians already use cannabis, and many view pot as relatively harmless. But is that backed up by science? Our Christine Bierak looks at the questions doctors still have on how marijuana affects your health.
It's not even that I really liked the effect of it, but just the community of it, the giggling, and the fact that I actually felt like I was a part of something for the first time.
A sense of belonging. At 15, it meant everything. By the time high school was over, Vanessa Markov and her friends were smoking pot every day.
As a kid, I absolutely didn't think it was addictive because no one had ever talked about it being addictive.
15 years later, she found herself in a doctor's office pleading for help with multiple mental health issues.
I just started to have extreme panic attacks. And very high anxiety, brutal social anxiety, to the point where I had to be either drunk or high in order to really relate to people or feel comfortable in my own skin.
When she tried to cut back on cannabis, that's when Markov realized she couldn't do it. Contrary to popular belief, it's estimated 9% of cannabis users will develop an addiction or dependency, which is less than alcohol and nicotine. But for those who start toking as teenagers, it's about 17%. And while they may think pot eases their stress and anxiety, think again.
These are people at risk for psychosis.
Regular cannabis use can rewire the brain, which is still developing until the age of 25. Near daily use has been associated with a higher risk of suicide, depression, and anxiety disorders.
We understand little about everything. We do understand enough to say that young people should not use cannabis.
Researchers still have a lot of questions, but they found for some, and they're not sure how many, marijuana increases the risk of developing mental illness, including psychosis and schizophrenia.
I would love to go to a party and tell, yes, you can use, no, you can't, yes, you can, no, you can't. We are not there yet. We don't know who can use and will have no trouble, versus some people, some very young people who are actually going to become very sick.
For Canadians young and old, frequent users or not, driving while stoned is also a serious concern. In the long and short term, marijuana can harm memory, concentration, and decision-making skills. Driving high doubles the risk of being in a collision, and yet
we're learning that there's a lot of misperceptions about drug-impaired driving, and a lot of Canadians feel that they are better drivers when they're under the influence of cannabis.
A recent Health Canada survey found students don't think smoking cannabis is as risky as they once did. In 2014, 25% of students said smoking cannabis once in a while was a great risk. 2 years later, it was down to 17%.
As a society, we need to become better educated about what the effects of cannabis are. And I think if you have that knowledge, it's going to be less daunting to have these conversations with young people.
Markov admits she probably wouldn't have listened to anyone's advice, but she regrets spending more than a decade of her life in a drug-induced haze.
I was extremely lethargic. I went from being an athlete to being a couch potato.
It took her 6 months to break her cannabis habit, but 3 years later, she welcomes legalization.
I'm totally for it because I think it's time for people to stop arguing over whether or not users are criminals and start looking at the resources and the help for people who do have a problem with it.
Markov has learned the hard way. For her, marijuana isn't a harmless cure-all. She hopes others can avoid making the same mistakes. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.